Do you use a DNA company like Ancestry or 23andMe? Well, if you do, you may be concerned about your Fourth Amendment rights to keep your intellectual and your private property safe from law enforcement and from other folks. Well, today we're going to be talking about what are the risks and what do these headlines mean about these DNA companies that have given information to the FBI and they've been able to solve old, open, or closed criminal cases, they either cold or warm. So stick with us. It's going to be a really interesting ride and strap in. This is the Rob Manus Show. Liberty loving Americans, I know you're concerned about your civil rights in today's America, as am I. Whether it's your right to bear arms or rights of conscience, seems like they're all under pressure these days. That's why I was really concerned when I noticed some alarming headlines a few weeks ago about the FBI and a company called FamilyTreeDNA.com. Here are a few of those headlines. Family Tree DNA opens its genealogy database to the FBI. Family Tree DNA admits the FBI is using their database. Handing over genetic data to the FBI. Report genealogy company allowing the FBI to use private DNA database. These headlines will really get your attention if you're concerned, as I am, about the surveillance of Americans. And personally, as a citizen who has used some of these companies, it's very misleading. The company president wrote his clients, and I quote, to address the news that our gene by gene laboratory, which processes genetic tests for several commercial clients, in addition to all of the family tree DNA tests, has processed a handful of DNA samples for cold cases from the FBI. In many cases, the news reports contain false or misleading information. Let me start with this categorical statement, he said. Law enforcement does not have open access to the FTDNA database. They cannot search or dig through the profiles any more than an ordinary user can. As with all other genetic genealogy services, law enforcement must provide valid legal process, such as a subpoena or a search warrant, to receive any information beyond that which any other user can access. I've been an avid genealogist since I was 12 years old, he said. Family Tree DNA is not just a business, it's my passion. I fully understand your privacy concerns on a personal level. Law enforcement has the ability to test DNA samples from crime scenes and upload the results into databases like any other customer, and it appears they've been doing it at other companies for the past year. The distinction is that, according to our terms of service and privacy policy, we expect the FBI and law enforcement agencies to let us know when they submit something to our database. We moved to something transparent rather than having them work in a stealthy way. Other than that, nothing changed that affects the privacy of you, our customer. We at Family Tree DNA have always taken your privacy seriously and will continue to do so. We've remained steadfast, always refusing to sell your data to pharmaceutical companies and other third parties. One of the key reasons law enforcement wanted to submit their samples to us is the same reason many of you have. Out of all the major companies, we are the only one that has its own lab, and our customer samples never leave our company. Unquote. I think you get the gist of the concerns of both the company and their clients. But do we really need to be concerned about these companies? My family uses Ancestry and 23andMe. We've signed the terms of service, and both say our data is protected unless released via legal processes like a subpoena or search warrant. So, what's really going on? It's not what the headlines would make you believe. Last year, law enforcement recognized that genetic genealogy could be the key to solving decades old cases, and they were right. The Golden State Killer was identified and arrested. Many other cold cases were reopened and solved, decades old murder and rape cases, while also being used to establish the identity of Jane and John Does all over the place. Families finally have some closure from this amazing work. But where will it take us next? Is your DNA sort of like a fingerprint? How do we protect our Fourth Amendment rights while leveraging these amazing technologies? Our guest today is business owner, legal and genealogical researcher, former school board member and vice chair of the Lafayette, Louisiana Republican Party, Miss Denise Skinner. Well, hi, Denise. Welcome to the Rob Maness Show on OpsLens TV. We are so glad to have you on and get the benefit of your experience in genetic research and genealogy and those kinds of things, and your experience with these DNA companies and what the risks are or not of our data being released to the wrong people for the
Right,
wrong
right.
reasons.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, let's dive right in and just ask. I'm going to ask you flat out, how did you get into this research? I know you do a lot of it, and you have some personal background. I'd love for you to tell as much of that story
Right,
as you would like to and feel comfortable.
right. Well, Rob, I was adopted as a child. So I, along with a lot of other people in the country several years ago, realized that through this technology, you might be able to back into birth parents. So when Ancestry and all these other DNA companies gave adoptees the opportunity to upload their DNA on a board and find relatives, then a lot of skill sets started to develop about how to back into an unknown person. So that's been going on for about 2 years. And in that time period, a couple of people, we call them search angels, like Cece Moore and Barbara Ventura, I think is how she pronounces her name, or Ventura, um, started guiding people through that process and how to build basically a reverse tree. So normally in genealogy, when you're building a tree, you start with yourself, you add your parents, you add your grandparents, your great grandparents. But in this technique, you go backwards and you're dealing with fragments. You get some DNA hits, and someone tells you, okay, I'm your third cousin, and I'm your fourth cousin, I'm your second cousin, I'm your first cousin, and in all that information, you build a backwards tree, try to figure out how these people are related to each other and how you fit in to make all of this true. And if you're successful, you can back into your birth parents that way if it's a closed adoption. Um, so in watching all of that, is developed kind of an I want to say underground kind of group of, but I guess it is, people who follow CC Moore, like on DNA Detectives. I think she has 111,000 followers. Barbara Venture has a bunch of followers on her website as well. That people basically have self-taught themselves and helped each other in the adoption community with this particular idea, technology, skill, marrying science, DNA science, with old-fashioned genealogy um, research techniques. So they call it genetic genealogy, basically.
So basically, what that means, and I appreciate that you are such an advocate for adoption. We have adoption in our family, so
Right,
our family big advocates for adoption, and I do appreciate that. But the issue that we want to talk about today is these headlines about the FBI getting into different
right,
DNA companies' databases, and that immediately sets off alarm bells for civil libertarians like me and
right,
you and my viewers, really. And that is that, oh my goodness, can law enforcement get a hold of mine and my family's DNA without a warrant or without a
right,
subpoena, and following the Constitution? Do we
right.
really have anything to worry about here, Denise?
Well, first off, if you read the headlines, which, and I kind of wrote them down, let's see. Family Tree opens its genealogy database to FBI. Family Tree admits sharing genetic data with FBI. DNA testing kit companies handing over genetic data to the FBI. And those are just false headlines. That's not what's happening. Um, about 3 or 4 years ago, Barbara Venture in California was asked to help identify a girl who was abandoned at 5 years old in California, who was, I guess, an adult at this time. And the police said, we don't know who this girl was. You've been working with all these adoptees throughout the country. Could you try to help us identify her identity? And Barbara said, yes. Well, as it turns out, it backed into a case in New Hampshire, the Bear Brook murders, where basically this young girl's father, from what I understand, was a serial killer. And basically, Barbara and her team, after 20,000 hours of research, were able to identify where this girl came from, and in the meantime, solved a serial killer mystery. And that was a big deal. So the police came back to her and asked her to do it again in a case in California. It was a California serial killers. And a year ago, they announced that they were successful in finding that particular serial killer, and he was still alive, and he has been arrested. Since that time, in the last 12 months, I guess the adoption research secret, if that's what you want to call it, how we've been researching birth parents over the past several years, is kind of out. Now law enforcement wants in on that. So the question has always been, should anyone really allow law enforcement to listen to Barbara speak? Barbara does not, when I've listened to her audios, um, when you leave your DNA in a public place, you don't have the constitutional protection. It's out there in the public domain. So if you have left your DNA at a crime scene, um, I guess, her thinking after researching it is that the police do have a right to use whatever techniques they can to identify that DNA. And so the interesting thing when you think about DNA, when back many, many years ago when the fingerprint came out, a fingerprint specific to a person, your DNA code is specific to a person as well. And it was just groundbreaking for law enforcement. And this is just 1,000 times that. Kind of groundbreaking for law enforcement. But when you really look at a DNA code, what's interesting about it is it's the fragmented representation of all of your ancestors. So you own that code, but you also share that code with a lot of other people. And those people right now on Ancestry and other boards, GEDmatch and the like, are not shy about sharing who they are and who they're related to. And so if you've committed a crime and you've left your DNA at that crime scene, there is a chance in the very near future that the police may look to this kind of research to solve that crime. C.C. Moore is another genetic genealogist that started in the adoption world and had some concerns about the privacy and adoption and whether or not allowing law enforcement in. And when this kind of broke loose and there was a lot of support about it, she went to work for a company called Parabon, and she used all of the skills that she had learned over the past several years working with adoptees. And she alone, from what I've counted in the past year, I think has solved a little under 30 cold case murders or missing person cases that have been just pending and for all this time. So what's happening is you have a lot of dangerous people who committed a lot of very serious crimes who are now either being held accountable or those mysteries are being resolved. You have, unfortunately, victims who've never been identified all this time who have the potential now to be identified and closure brought to those families and those victims brought home to those families. There's a case right now that affects basically Lafayette, Louisiana. There was a case in 1991 in League City, the Killing Fields, Janet Doe. They've never been able to find out who Janet Doe was. They're now announcing that whoever she was, who she was murdered in 1991, she's connected genealogically to the Acadiana area by certain family names and certain genetic research they've been able to do so far. They haven't gotten a close enough match, but they have enough matches to give us the public 10 names and say that her family, whoever they were, are from the Broussard area, the St. Landry area, basically the Lafayette and surrounding areas. So they're working on that one. So if they're successful, that means this young girl who's laid basically in a morgue unclaimed since 1991 will be able to go home finally and get back to her family. So that's remarkable as well.
That's amazing and exciting use of the technology because I mean, we all have heavy hearts when we think about cold cases and parents and brothers and sisters and grandparents that and
Right,
whole entire families that have been torn up for years and years and years because it's a really devastating thing when somebody is missing,
right,
and that you don't know what happened to them, and it
right,
it it, it sticks with you. They say that the pain from a family death never goes away, but this pain of someone that's missing that everybody loved and that loved
Right,
them is extremely difficult and
right,
is always alive, you know.
right.
So
Always like
so I
big feel
appreciate
good
that
love.
and
And the adoptees
absolutely.
have the same
So
kind of feelings that, you just don't know the big empty blank question that's out there. You don't know the answer. So
so
you
what's the
just,
process? So what's the process for the FBI to get into a database like at Family Tree
okay. So
DNA?
what they're actually doing, when you're just a consumer like yourself or myself, and we want to get into these databases, we'll go through maybe like Ancestry or 23andMe and take order a kit online and do your saliva or whatever they're asking you to do and send it in. And then they transfer that saliva into some kind of code that you upload, like for example on Ancestry. From there, I can take that code and upload it on a program called, for example, GEDmatch, which is basically GED match. They call it GEDmatch. GEDmatch doesn't do testing, but they allow you to take DNA code and upload it to their program. And there you can do DNA analysis, see if you have matches, centimorgan matches with different people. That's the website or the platform that law enforcement has been using because GEDmatch will allow law enforcement to upload a DNA code onto their platform. What changed this year and got all the different headlines is that with the family tree allowed law enforcement to do the same, upload a code of someone they're looking for to identify onto their platform. So law enforcement doesn't have any access to anyone's DNA. They're not, what they're doing is just the same thing you and I are doing if we're accessing the platform and we're uploading our code onto that platform. And from there, the only people you're going to see is the people connected to your particular code. So if you upload a piece of DNA onto a platform, the only thing that's going to show up in the database are those people who are potential match to you and or to your sample. And then at that point, it'll give you some ideas of what kind of matches that they are. It'll tell you this is a close relative match, possibly a parent, a sister. This might be a first cousin match, a second cousin match. A lot of times you get a lot of fourth cousin matches depending on the platform that you're using. Um, so if you can get close to a second cousin match, your chances of success, are pretty good. I think that I read that Parabon right now suspects that if law enforcement uses their products, that they probably have a 50% chance of solving the story, whatever it is, if it's going to be a crime or a victim. Um, and Parabon also has this other thing that they do for their clients. They, based on DNA alone, without even uploading the DNA on a platform to see who the relatives may or may not be, Parabon has a thing called Snap technology that they can actually take a piece of DNA and come back and tell you just about everything about this person, including a sketch of what this person looked like, which is amazing. And from what I've watched in the past year, it seems pretty accurate. So the whole idea of DNA and everything that it's doing and all the doors that it's opening on so many different levels is just it's just amazing. But the idea that law enforcement has access to anyone's DNA, they do not. What they have access to is the DNA of the person at the crime scene that they're investigating, and they are uploading that scientific number DNA code onto a platform and just looking at the different platform and asking it, give me an idea of who this person might be, who their relatives are. So that is, when you have a needle in a haystack and you can narrow it down and at least get a clue that whoever you're looking for's great grandfather lived in Kentucky and had 3 children and maybe a fourth cousin here, I mean, it just helps you narrow down the field a whole lot more and figure out more about that person and close in the gaps. So it's you get on these boards and you kind of watch these stories unfold almost in real time, and it's so amazing to watch it. And there's all kinds of boards out there if you want to just kind of watch some of these cases that you can get on and help people either solve either adoption stories by researching, and then just good old fashioned uh, genealogy research, old census records, old birth records, old death records, and so forth are all the things that come into play when you start tracking down people after that. So sometimes it goes quickly, sometimes it does not. I know that, the cold case, the California serial killer case, I'm told 20,000 hours of research amongst volunteers helping on that case. It's a lot of time, you know.
That is a
But
lot of that is a lot of time. Question for you though: when the FBI gets say they get an exact match with a piece of data or
right,
DNA from one of these companies' sites, that's when they have to get a warrant or a subpoena
yes.
to get
If
access
you're
to the
watching the
exact data.
California, yeah, if you're watching the California serial killer case and what they did there, which I suspect is, kind of what they're how they have to do it. Um, when they narrowed it down for the police in that case, they narrowed it down to a couple of brothers. And of course, they were able to eliminate one cousin brother from the other because of where these people lived. And we obviously, if the person lived in California who committed these crimes, and one of the people did, one didn't. I understand that. Also, the DNA indicated when they narrowed it down to like 6 people that the person they were looking for would have blue eyes. And out of all 6, one of them had blue eyes. So they narrowed it down, and then they got the police at that point got a search warrant. And that gave them the opportunity to follow their suspect and wait for him to be in a public place and retrieve some DNA that he had left behind in a public place, and then take that DNA and match it against the suspect DNA that they had, and then they knew that they had someone, and they had what they were looking for. And actually, in that case, it was a retired police officer, and that had committed all these horrendous crimes. So yeah, there is a point before the FBI moves forward that they have to get a court involved and actually get a real piece of DNA from the person they're suspecting, based on the relative match. So there is that element. But basically, what I can understand is if you leave your DNA in a public place, then you don't have a problem with taking that and going wherever it takes you, whatever amount of research and whatever platform that there is so far.
Sure, right.
Now,
It sounds like
so
our
person that say it sounds great, we are in a whirlwind year because it's just game on for every law enforcement officer. Now they all want to use this for their own cold cases, and so you have a lot every day. It seems like they're announcing another mystery solved. There is going to be someone, I'm sure, in all of this who's going to put forth, a vigorous defense and challenge some of this, and then we'll really see, I guess, when the courts test the way that that's being used. But I did notice another kind of interesting thing, that when these very big headlines came out, FBI has access to your DNA, about a month and a half ago. I did notice that the FBI very cleverly put out a big story about a case they were working on. It's a serial killer who's actually in jail. His name is Sam Little, I think, and he's the artist serial killer where he literally has remembered every woman that he has hurt and murdered, and he actually drew a sketch of these women. But apparently, some of these women have never been found. So I thought it was kind of interesting that the FBI didn't connect it to the stories about them, but they kind of put out this huge story about a case that they just happen to be working on right now. And I thought it was just, a clever way of them just letting people know that there's some real legitimate work that needs to be done. This is great technology, and it's a great resource, and it's great research, and they're using it to solve some, bring some peace to a lot of people.
there is some absolutely legitimate work to be done here, not just to solve cold cases, but to also absolve people that may have been put in prison without before DNA was available, and have them be found innocent. That's happening literally
Right.
hundreds of times a year now, and people have even been able to get off of death row and be freed from prison
Right.
because DNA evidence now proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were not the perpetrator that was
Right.
wrongfully convicted. So I see a
Right.
lot of good things
Right.
there, and it sounds like
Right.
our Fourth Amendment rights are pretty well protected from the law enforcement process perspective. To me, to our family, the terms of service was the next way that we could have within our own decision making hands the ability to get the best protection of our property
Right.
through the terms of service of the companies that
Right. We
we
did.
sought to get their services for DNA. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, so you just read the terms of service in each one of the platforms. There's several out there, and if you don't agree with what they may or may not do, then don't participate. Uh, and it's just as simple as that. But going back to DNA, and every year that goes by, we find out more and more about DNA, and it gets deeper in terms of medicine, in terms of just connecting it to genealogy. So it gets bigger and bigger, and it identifies you more and more as the years go by because they're getting deeper and deeper into the DNA and finding out even more stuff. It's just it's amazing. And on another note, I would say that the government's already kind of doing this with the unknown soldier program. So we have a lot of soldiers that bodies that haven't been identified. So in Hawaii, there's a whole clinic that does nothing but this. They're taking samples from family members who are missing soldiers to make sure they have good genetic matches, and they're using this kind of genetic genealogy and identifying old cases of soldiers that have been to war and maybe have come home. So they're doing it inside of our government in Hawaii for the military right now, and they have been for a long time. So that's also kind of interesting. It's kind of mirrored what the adoptees are doing online and helping each other out. It's been going on for quite a while, probably 10 years, but I can tell you that it's been public for a year, and it's just going to speed up even more. Some people will get off of the platforms, um, and that's fine, but I think more people will get on the platforms and more people will participate. And so you may choose to not participate in a particular platform, but if your first cousin did and you've committed a crime, then there's a chance that they could be able to find you. That's just how it's,
Absolutely.
how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you coming on today, Denise, and talking about this with us. It looks like the future is very exciting, that there are ways to protect ourselves and our privacy and our personal property, and that it's all incumbent upon the individual
Right,
citizen's responsibility to make sure that they're doing everything they can. And the framework is there within the companies and within the way the systems are
right,
working to protect us, while at the same time opening up these exciting new windows and horizons of
right,
opportunities to solve
right,
cold cases, put families' fears and worries to rest, and absolve people that have been wrongfully convicted, and make sure the right criminals are getting the right
right,
punishment
right.
and being
And maybe
convicted.
just find some
So
people
I
to
see
bring
that
them
as a
home.
good thing.
Exactly. It's a great thing. I think it's a great thing. If you don't like the terms of service, don't participate. That,
That's right.
but your cousin may. So if you commit a crime, you know, here we go. Might find you.
That's right. That's right. Well,
So
thank you very much, Denise.
thank you, Rob.
We
Appreciate it.
really
It's good
appreciated
seeing
having
you.
you on the Rob Manus Show.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. We've learned a lot tonight, and don't forget, protect your information. It's your private property. Protect your data. It's your private property. Choose wisely when you're looking for a provider to test and store your DNA. This is Rob Manus. Until next week on the Rob Manus Show.